Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's the third session of the Airflow Management Awareness Month, State of the Data Center, Creating Data Center Airflow and Efficiency During the Digital Evolution. My name is Kennedy Williams, Senior Marketing Manager here at Upsite Technologies, and I'd like to introduce you to our two presenters. First is our special guest, Bill Kleyman. Bill's an enthusiastic technologist and cloud architect. He has experiences including data center design, virtualization, the cloud, security, Internet of Things, and a whole bunch more. Bill enjoys writing, blogging, and educating people around everything to do with technology. During the day, Bill is the CTO at MTM Technologies, where he interacts with enterprise organizations, helping to align their IT strategies with direct business goals. Bill's got a bunch of white papers, articles, video blogs, and podcasts that have been published on places such as Data Center Knowledge, Information Week, Network Computing, Tech Target, ZDNet, Slashdot, and of course the Upsite blog, as well as many others. Also joining us, as always, is Lars Strong, the Senior Engineer here at Upsite Technologies. Lars is a thought leader and recognized expert on data center optimization, and he currently serves as our Senior Engineer and the company Chief Science Officer here at Upsite Technologies. He's a certified U.S. Department of Energy Data Center Energy Practitioner and HVAC Specialist. Without further ado, I'll turn it over to you guys. Bill.
Thank you so much, Kennedy, and I appreciate this wonderful introduction. Lars, good to be presenting with you once again. I think the last time you and I spoke was at Data Center World, which was a lot of fun. So it's definitely a pleasure to have you here again as well. So everybody on this call, this is going to be a really interesting conversation, right? We've got the State of the Data Center conversation and topic to kind of go over, but really where cooling is impacting this entire data center conversation and sort of what's happening out there. You're going to get an interesting perspective from me, guys. You really are, and I know I'm going to talk a million miles an hour here as we go through this content. So if you have any questions at all, please let's make this an interactive session. Lars and I are going to be talking about a variety of different kinds of things today throughout this conversation, and make sure you join in. I know Kennedy's going to be watching that feed. By all means, pop something in there. We're going to go ahead and cover that as we go along. So a few topics to cover today. I'm just going to build this slide out here really quick. We're going to go over some of the big critical business and data center trends out there, some of the understanding new use cases, requirements. Then we're going to talk about new kinds of considerations around things like density, airflow management, new ways to be efficient in this data center world when it comes to digital economies, understanding cooling solutions, and obviously you're going to get a really fun little last portion of this webinar with Bill and Lars, top 5 best practices for cooling and the digital data center. Now, before I go on, everybody, I cannot absolutely bill myself as the preeminent cooling expert on this call. There's a lot of smart people on here, the Lars, without a doubt. But I do get a chance to live in a data center a lot, and I get a chance to work with a variety of different kinds of data centers across all different kinds of verticals and even organization sizes. I live in the world of cloud, virtualization, density, conversion, application delivery, for example, but then I also absolutely get a chance to swim in the data center waters. So what I get a chance to do is see the big picture, and everybody on this call, please take something away from this, whether you're a facilities person, working with data center environmentals, maybe you're a manager. It's important to see the bigger picture out there as far as what's happening with a digital framework, virtualization specifically, things like cloud, and then where all of this is actually impacting your world and things around cooling and environmentals and data center efficiency, for example, even power utilization. So what we're going to do is we're going to guide the conversation from a little bit of a higher level, what's impacting the data center today from a technology perspective, and then we're going to really dive into who is spending money on cooling and where their efficiency is, and so on. So to really kind of start this conversation, let's begin at a bit of a really high level here. One of the things that I've been seeing, and please remember this is impacting everyone in the data center space, is absolutely a changing business model. We've got various types of cloud solutions out there, whether it's public, private, hybrid cloud. We've got an explosion of users out there as well as data. We're working with things like the Internet of Things, obviously cloud and SaaS applications. Now, here's the reality. When we talk about these changing models, there's a big preeminent marketing term that I'm sure everyone's heard, digitization, right? This digital world. And, I don't want to make it another marketing term, but it is absolutely something that's happening out there. Change isn't always like a light switch, right? The lights aren't off. Even in our world, technology change is not binary. It's ongoing and ever evolving. And here's a really fun way to kind of quantify it. Everybody listening on this call, I bet somebody might be listening from an iPad, a tablet. I don't know if anyone's doing this from their iPhone. That's kind of a small screen to be looking at. But I know that people on this call right now in front of them have at least 2 or 3 devices, probably more, that can connect into the cloud or process some kind of a data. And let's not forget that at the heart of cloud, this entire digital framework sits the data center. And so it's important to understand this whole digital conversation isn't just transforming the business, the way consumers access data and applications. It's also transforming your data center. And this is something I'm absolutely seeing as well. And as the alignment between business and data center operations becomes closer and closer, we're going to see a transformation of process and business models. We're going to see greater requests from data center operators to empower workforce efficiency and innovation. And we're most of all going to see how data center operations are going to be able to personalize user, business, citizen experiences where one data center ecosystem can do everything from like big data processing to parallel processing for things like analytics and data intelligence, all the way to traditional virtualization deployments and so on. So it's important to take a look at the entire picture of the market as well and kind of what's happening as far as the evolution of the data center and cloud market. These are really important statistics, guys. And one of the things that I've seen happen is the conversation around cloud. Just a few years ago, there was this big conversation, big trend, people saying, we are moving into cloud, we're going to forklift everything and actually just get rid of our data centers and move into some kind of a cloud architecture like AWS and or Azure and so on. Well, here's the reality. That's not entirely what's happening, because the definition of cloud is now being defined by the users and obviously the business owners themselves, where cloud could be an on-premise data center, a hybrid solution. And one of the really great statistics that I saw recently from IDC is that by 2021, 85% of ecosystems out there are going to be a multi-cloud kind of environment. So not just one platform, but rather a multitude of them. So in this kind of architecture, there's a great Gartner report that said more than $1 trillion of IT spending is going to be somehow affected by the shift into the cloud. But it's important to understand this isn't somebody just forklifting stuff and putting it into AWS. It's literally looking at actual physical infrastructure where it's become a part of any organization, and spending continues to increase around data center technology, where on-prem IT infrastructure spend is going to be accounting for more than 60% of all end-user hardware spending in 2016. And the big factor here is that by the end of this year alone, we're going to see many organizations, and honestly not just enterprises, get into the whole cloud conversation as well. Now, the final point that I want to make here, before we go into a little bit more of a granular topic, and this is a really great report. Guys on the call, if you get a chance, go on Google. You can find this Jones Lang LaSalle data center report. It's free. You don't have to sign up for anything, but take a look at it. But they pointed something out that was very, very interesting. There's data center growth, and there's a big market around it. All across the United States, everything from the East Coast to the West Coast data center market, we're seeing a boom. Yes, data centers are being designed differently. We're seeing more levels of density, more levels of efficiency, for example. But without a doubt, we're seeing new initiatives that are pushing the demand for space through the roof in many markets, and demand continues to spread both in primary and secondary markets. And this is continuing to grow at a staggering pace as organizations try to go into more of a services model, more of a consumption model, maybe sometimes working with a co-location partner or a data center partner, or maybe even to some extent building out their own ecosystem. The bottom line is this: as you look at your own environment, your own data center systems, whether you are operating within a partnering kind of organization, you've got your own environment, there's change happening, and there's money being spent around your data center. But the way you spend that money and allocate budget is going to be is going to really impact the levels of efficiency, how you integrate with the business, and so on. So that brings us to a very important next point: energy usage today, and really what you're spending money on from a high-level perspective. And I'd love for everybody on this call to kind of bring this slide into your own hearts and minds, and really kind of ask yourself the question: what am I spending my money on? Maybe you have this mapped out, maybe you don't, but we're seeing that 50%, and this is a great report that we got recently from IDC. There's a 50% of cost today in energy usage is going into IT equipment, and some of it, 25% going into cooling. Obviously, air movement, making sure circulation is proper, is 12%. But we're seeing between these kinds of elements, between IT equipment and cooling alone, as well as air movement, 37% of energy consumption is done just by moving and cooling air. That's a lot of energy and power usage just to cool and move air around, where there's got to be ways to improve efficiency by not just overcooling, and this is kind of a cheesy term, but literally letting your data center breathe a little bit better. I'm going to take a break here, maybe take a sip of water. No more coffee for me. But I want to bring Lars into this conversation. I mean, he lives in this world, and he sees cooling grow, evolve, shift, and move around as sort of as anything happens in the industry these days. Lars, what are your thoughts here? I mean, is this accurate? Is this what you're seeing from a cooling perspective? And really, can you save up to 40% of spending on power and efficiency by creating better air movement and cooling best practices? What are your thoughts there, Lars?
Yeah, appreciate that, Bill. There's a lot that can be learned from this really simple slide, and this just represents a typical PUE chart for a PUE that comes out to 2. If half the power consumed by the entire data center is being consumed by the IT equipment, then the total divided by half is 2. You get a PUE of 2 for this chart. Obviously, PUEs are getting better at some sites, but they're still worse at some sites. So the average is coming down as people improve, but the exact numbers are not important. What really stands out here is how much energy is consumed by the cooling infrastructure. There may be a very good ROI and business case for improving the efficiency of, say, a UPS system. However, when you look at this chart, the electrical conversion and distribution losses represent only 10% of the total usage of the data center. So you don't get a lot of leverage out of improving the IT, out of improving the electrical infrastructure. We see that the mechanical cooling and the fans represent 37% of the total. That's around more than 70% of the non-IT load goes to cooling. So the greatest point of leverage here is improving the cooling efficiency, and the way to improve the cooling efficiency is by improving the airflow management in the room. That's where it all starts.
Lars, that makes a lot of sense to me, right? And here's what everybody needs to understand as well. Your data center is going to continue to shift and morph, whether you're deploying, unified computing, levels of hyper-converged infrastructure. So the way you have to think about air movement and cooling is going to continue to evolve. A PUE of 2, listen, we're writing reports and we're doing all this research for data center knowledge, and you heard guys mention that I'm one of the featured contributors out there. And one of the things that we're absolutely seeing, and Lars, I want to get your thoughts on this, is the lowering of that PUE standard and really how important that is. Listen, we see Google and Facebook bragging left and right as they get closer to the, sort of the holy grail of 1. But what are you seeing today? Is 2 kind of like we should be doing a little bit better than this, we're wasting a lot of money and energy, or is 2 kind of like we're there, it's working for us, let's just leave it where it is, Lars? What do you think, Lars?
Yeah, I see a lot of data centers that are somewhere between 1.5 and 2, a few that are over 2. Even in sites that have been making an effort to improve, they can still be around 2, even that have been making dramatic improvements. So yeah, it's really easy to beat ourselves up over comparing to the Googles and the Amazons and the Facebooks of the world who have these, 1.1 PUEs, but that's pretty unrealistic for most people in the world. Most people have still got a lot of room for improvement, and I appreciate how you bring it back to, the title of this presentation, the digital evolution. We're not really talking about the evolution here. We're talking about some fundamentals, and it's important to understand these fundamentals and get as much out of the data center as you possibly can, so that you're ready for what's coming in the future.
That makes a lot of sense. That really does. And I know we're going to get into this a little bit later. I don't want to steal too much thunder, but really simple cooling best practices can fix this. It can save you so much money. It can help you lower that PUE standard. But again, we're going to get into this in just a second. So one of the things that I've had a chance to do here is take a look at some research studies that we've done over at DCK, Data Center Knowledge. And by the way, everybody, I do implore you guys to go on that website. It's a lot of fun, really good content down there, especially around things like cooling and data center power. But from a recent study, right, looking at data center architecture, we found a very interesting trend in the sense that you, the audience and the customer, you're asking about cooling. You're saying, listen, I know my data center isn't the same anymore. I know I'm potentially running more inside of my data center. So how do I impact these different kinds of cooling solutions out there? And in a survey done very recently, we saw 45%, more than 45%, of survey respondents answered that they're running at least 7 kilowatts of equipment per rack. My God, I wish I could do a poll across all the people on here and say, is this accurate? What are you guys seeing? Lars, I'll ask you that question in just a second. But beyond that, we're seeing how 80% of respondents agree or strongly agree that reducing cooling costs is one of their highest priorities. As we increase density, as we put more cloud into your data centers, more remote users, more data processing, this explosion of remote, more access, for example, your cooling requirements are going to grow. There's really no question around that. All of a sudden, between power and airflow movement and cooling requirements, you're talking about a considerable cost here. So we're seeing some of these conventional and some of the more interesting techniques specifically for cooling best practices. So we're seeing 51% of people are still using some kind of an air containment as a part of their cooling strategy, and 55% or more use different kinds of units, whether it's air economizers or water side economizers or evaporative cooling, for example. So there's ways that organizations are looking into these kinds of ecosystems to impact cooling even more specifically. And that begs the question of what kind of cooling are you using, and is it really effective for your business? Because, when you look at any kind of piece of technology, you have to ask the question, yes, it works. I get it that it works for you, but it's actually bringing you value. Conventional methodologies might still allow your data center to operate, but is it getting you closer to that PUE that you ultimately want? And are you actually saving money around this? So, Lars, I want to bring you in here and kind of point out on each of these, have you speak at least on each of these points here. The amount of power and the rack, is it really increasing? Do you see, obviously you're in the cooling industry, the fact that cooling is a huge consideration around reducing costs? And then talk to me about conventional cooling techniques. Whether it's some kind of a containment unit or if it's some kind of an economizer. What are you seeing out there that's being predominantly used? And what are some advice for people who really do see that cooling is an important piece of their environment, what they can do a little bit better?
Yeah, there's a couple of things here. So just starting with the densities in the cabinets, one of the things that's happening as the data center industry evolves is that there's a greater and greater disparity or variation in the density in cabinets. There are plenty of cabinets out there, even in modern data centers with high IT turnover refresh rates, where the density is under a couple of kilowatts in a cabinet. But in that same computer room, there may be cabinets that have 10, 20, even 30 kilowatts in a cabinet or more. So we're seeing these huge variations in the density in cabinets. The average is still relatively low, but you can't look at the average because there's the need to cool these very dense cabinets. It's entirely possible without water and using standard airflow, raised floor or even slab environments with flooded supply to cool high-density cabinets. I know of a site that is doing over 50 kilowatts in a cabinet on a raised floor, doors on the ends of the row and baffles, but no full roof, not even full containment. So if it's done well, you can do some really high density cooling. Then looking over to these, what types of cooling are people using? I think this slide really points out that back to what I was talking about PUE. So if a site is not using one of these, 3 economization modes, evaporative cooling, water side, or air side economizers, they're going to be really struggling to get their PUEs under, 2, under 1 and 3/4 or so. So we see the vast majority, from this data, 3/4 of people are not using those technologies, and so they're going to be in the higher PUE range.
Lars, I'm going to ask you a point-blank question. These conventional cooling techniques, is it enough? I mean, organizations, they need to be looking at different kind of ways to cool their environments. You don't have to give a specific technology or an answer, but is this enough to support today's digital trends? I mean, I see the data centers changing every single day. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Bill. There's one of the things I say is there's 2 kinds of data centers in the world. Every data center in the world can be put in one of 2 categories: those with intake temperature problems and those without intake temperature problems. So is the data center effectively cooling the IT equipment is one thing, and then the other is it doing it efficiently? So yeah, these standard methods are perfectly adequate. The question is that the right choice for the business? Is doing it inefficiently okay? Obviously, for the environment and being a good global citizen, it's not a good idea to be running a multi-megawatt data center at a PUE of 3, but it is happening, and it's just it's a business decision, and that's one thing that I think is missing from a lot of these conversations is everybody says, oh, you have to do X, you have to do Y. Well, every site, every business is unique, and every business really just needs to have the conversation to decide where they need to go.
Yeah, that's such a good point, and that's such a prolific point. You need to have the business conversation. As somebody who works in both the data center world and interacts very closely with the business model, you have to create champions in the business environment, right? You have to have your business leaders understand the value of an efficient data center. I can't stress this enough. Creating champions in that executive world, showing them practically how an extra grommet or a ceiling to a containment unit can save you so much money. Very interesting point. And Lars, you bring us to our next topic here. One of the best ways to get the attention of the business leaders is to show them how much you're spending on cooling and the cost of cooling. So I'm bringing up a very arbitrary example here. This is just a simple little use case. You've got 1,000 racks with 5 kilowatts of power per rack. You take a look at how much you're spending on IT power, your data center power. How much, this is again from our previous example of looking at how much being spent on IT. Cooling in general. You're taking a look at hours in a year, what it costs per kilowatt hour. Again, approximation. So you're talking about, $3.2 million a year spent on cooling alone. And, at first you might not realize it with 20 racks or 50 racks or 100 racks. But when you begin to really finalize and understand that cost, you are either, going to be complacent and say, okay, that's where I'm going to be paying for cooling, or you're going to say, what can I do to not only improve my cooling standards and lower my PUE, but also save on cost? Because remember, I don't want you to remove cooling solutions. I don't want you to deprecate the performance of your data center either. There are really cool architectures out there. Oh, cool, no pun intended. There are really cool architectures out there that are going to be able to allow your data center to breathe a little bit easier. But I want to pause on this little scenario and bring in Lars here and give me your idea and concept here, because here's the thing. Data centers are going to grow, and that rack number is going to grow as well. And the one thing that I've noticed is that these conversations really creep up on data center administrators and managers, kind of going from 0 to 1,000 much more quickly than a lot of people anticipate. To the extent that, you might start with a low cost, but then you get to this $3 million mark, and you're like, how did I get here? Where are the middle steps for me to contain and control these cooling and data center costs? So that I don't get to a point where I'm spending millions of dollars of cooling, but I'd rather have an environment that's, a lot more controlled and certainly standardized. So, Lars, I want to bring you into this example and get your thoughts on it. Is this accurate? Are you seeing organizations grow their racks, the power per rack, only to later realize that, holy cow, I'm spending a lot of money on cooling and air movement? So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think the most important point to bring up here is, again, about, are the conversations happening? Are the business conversations happening about where the costs are and what we can do about them? So I see a lot of conversations coming up around cooling, and people are aware of this chart, and they're realizing how much of their PUE goes to cooling. But the conversation often stops there and doesn't get into the root cause analysis nearly far enough. Because where it goes then is, okay, what's the solution? And we see the growth of containment solutions just exploding, and the implementation of containment is it's shown on those slides before. But it's really easy to say, oh, okay, so containment's going to be our silver bullet. And people go spend the money and they deploy containment, but then they don't get the benefits out of it because they've failed to address some of the fundamental considerations. And so it's pretty rare that a blanking panel conversation is going to reach the C-suite, or a grommet conversation is going to reach the C-suite, but it actually should. Because without those fundamentals in place, it's going to be impossible to really address this this dynamic.
My recommendation to everybody, as someone who does have these conversations, Lars, you are beyond correct. Please don't go to your CIO or CTO or CEO and say, "Hey, let me tell you about this grommet," because they're gonna be like, "You mean the cartoon?" No. That's not. No, the thing that goes in the data center. Instead, what I recommend is going and saying, hey, we're spending $3.2 million right now on data center cooling and airflow movement. I've got a really great way to save us $1 million. What do you think about talking about that? And when you start at the language level that an executive leader can understand, you better believe that they're going to sit down and say, tell me more about that $1 million and what it can do for me, and how we can actually impact different kinds of costs, and where that kind of solution can fit in. So know your audience. You can absolutely bring in these kinds of conversations. Again, and a lot of different kinds of leaders want to hear this level of efficiency. So Lars, you bring us up into a next point. You kind of queued me up really, really well. And again, on the topic of saving money and energy, most of all, what are companies actually doing out there to become more efficient? And I'm definitely going to bring you in here, Lars, a little bit to speak to these, because without a doubt you're an expert. But this is something that I'm seeing as well. First of all, reducing air mixing, hot-cold aisle separation, whether it's by reducing bypass, airflow, blanking plates like we talked about. And here's the kicker. My next slide is actually going to prove what Lars was talking about when we talk about air containment. That's as much secret sauce as you guys are going to get for now. You're going to see in just a second. But obviously, doing things like computational fluid design, optimizing the floor layout, looking very closely at what the supply and returns are for the IT load, working with different kinds of voltage to the rack, air side economization. I'm skipping one of those for now. Obviously, upgrading the technology, decommissioning servers that are old. Oh my God, do we have a legacy problem? And this is something that I'm seeing and actually speaking across the country about right now, is removing legacy from IT. Yes, I understand these servers still work and they still host some kind of a workload, but please take the time to understand the metrics behind those legacy servers, how much power they're taking. I mean, I'm literally talking everything from a spinning hard drive down to a legacy CPU that's still inefficient and taking up more energy and creating more heat for you. Now, one of the topics that I miss is my world, virtualization, not even so much cloud, but specifically virtualization, virtual desktop delivery, hypervisor technology. So I'm talking like VMware, Zen Server, Microsoft, KVM, working with application desktop delivery technologies like Zen App, Zen Desktop. These are unbelievably powerful multi-tenancy density solutions that are specifically designed to allow you to deliver more applications, desktops, workloads, and even data points, where you don't have to use multiple servers. One server can host, up to 300, 400, 500 VDI sessions, virtual desktop sessions, as opposed to maybe having, a rack of servers all functioning in similar areas. Yes, I understand that sometimes it's an investment, but you can actually do things like metering, OpEx deployments of server hardware where you don't necessarily own it, but you only use for the resources that are on there that you have to consume. So there's ways to deploy this stuff where, you can leverage both CapEx as well as OpEx investments where you can have these sorts of data center benefits. But I can't stress this enough. Everybody in this call, I'm willing to bet, has some level of virtualization enabled already. You probably do, but to which extent, I don't know. Some of the most efficient organizations out there are leveraging new systems around converged, hyper-converged infrastructure, things like Cisco HyperFlex or Nutanix, where they're seeing major benefits in the amount of stuff they can remove. Here's another big one, just kind of a tip. If you've got legacy spinning disk environments in your data center, please start looking at all-flash technologies. For example, like the folks from Pure, these kinds of ecosystems that remove spinning disk also remove heat, they remove power constraints, and actually increase virtualization capabilities and overall capabilities for the data center. But stepping away from virtualization a little bit, there is a lot of great ways to take a look at energy and cost savings when it comes to airflow and cooling best practices. So I'm going to take a step back here for just a second. And Lars, I want you to touch on these elements here and kind of what you're seeing, and maybe even to your experience, talking about which one of these factors you've seen to create, let's say, the fastest ROI and certainly maybe the most impactful. So what are your thoughts here, Lars?
One you spoke about a bunch who I want to address, which is the getting rid of comatose servers, old legacy spinning drives that are not doing anything anymore. People may laugh, but that often makes the top 5 or even sometimes the top 3 lists of ways, low-hanging fruit to reduce energy consumption. And I mean, this hits the bottom line hard because you take the PUE load out, you take the heat load out, you recover the stranded capacity, it comes back in many fold. And one thing we didn't talk about is that reducing the operating cost of the data center goes directly to the bottom line, which is a really nice thing. So that's a big piece. Don't overlook the importance of getting rid of those comatose servers. It can be a really challenging task to dig in and identify all that stuff, but that's really an important one. The CFD analysis, the engineering simulation is another term for that, of the data center is getting more and more important. This relates back to the concept that I talked about the variation in densities. Things are getting more dynamic and bigger ranges, and figuring out where to place equipment is getting more and more important. And just a little advertisement for our next week's webinar. We're going to be digging into this a lot more on the value of virtualization, of doing engineering simulation with CFD to figure out where is the best place to put stuff, and what impact is it going to have. Because when you put this stuff in the wrong location, and you end up tying up a bunch of resources and constraining yourself for the future. So those are a couple things that come to mind. There's a lot of other really important things on this list to consider, and they almost can consume a whole topic, a whole webinar of their own. So yeah.
No, that's a really good point, Lars. And obviously what we're seeing here from everybody on this call, as a takeaway, look at your own server ecosystem. I love what you said, those comatose servers. It's brilliant. And that's a lot of times we do lose the track of those assets that aren't actually doing anything for us. So everybody on this call, again, make sure you're asking questions and make sure you guys are bringing up some good conversation points here as well. We've got a few minutes left here, about 10 minutes or so to talk, and then we're going to bring up some Q&A topics. Let's actually take a look at some statistics here. Now, we talked about some of the ways you can save money on energy and cooling, but here is from that Data Center Knowledge Survey what people are actually doing. And Lars, you hit the nail on the head. Top 5, top 2, virtualization, right? Definitely up there as one of the ways you can consolidate equipment and create more efficiency. And the next one, I'm going to be honest, I'm not surprised. Air containment, but not just hot, cold aisles, right? Being able to contain portions of your data center, for example, looking at ways you can do variable speed coolers, adjusting temperatures of your environment, doing things like CFD modeling. But honestly, this is backing up the conversation that we just had, talking about some of the great ways you can save on dollars and cents when it comes to data center cooling. Again, from my world and perspective, please look at virtualization and removing legacy components from your environment. Again, there might be an investment up front, but you could be saving millions of dollars potentially when you create better cooling and energy utilization methodologies. Lars, do these results surprise you? I mean, is this pretty consistent with what you're seeing?
Yeah, this is consistent. There's no surprise. I mean, look at the number of people that have put in some form of air containment. Half of data centers. The question, though, says, which of the following techniques have been used to reduce demands on your cooling system? And so I'll bet you probably half of the people that said, we put in containment to reduce our cooling demands, they did that, but they didn't reduce their cooling demands. They didn't get as much benefit out of that as possible. One of the biggest misconceptions in the industry is that if I buy containment, I'm going to be more efficient. It's so you can't purchase efficiency, you have to manage efficiency. Buying containment and installing it will not make anything more efficient. It creates the environment that allows you to improve the efficiency and reduce the costs. So take a look at that in your data center and see if things really changed, and see how much more you might be able to change things. This all comes down to IT equipment intake temperatures and getting them as even and low as possible with various airflow management improvements, and then making adjustments to fan speeds and temperature set points to raise the supply temperatures as much as possible without causing intake temperatures to increase. And one of the points on this slide is adjusting the data center temperature upwards for the ASHRAE range. So we see only a third of data centers doing that. And that's really unfortunate. I think a lot of that is the result of a lack of understanding in the benefits. One of the chairmen of the ASHRAE committee was doing a presentation I was at, and he pointed out in a real poignant way. He said 80.6, the upper limit for the recommended intake temperature, is the speed limit. It's not, and so you go that's the speed limit, not the speed minimum. So he then showed a slide of a little old lady behind the wheel with her, barely able to see over the steering wheel. He said, "This is what most of you are doing. Most of you are driving at half the speed limit." And it's really due to a lack of understanding. Specifically, now, those are all nice things to say, but here's the reality is that a lot of servers, and this is part of the evolution of the data center and the evolution of the IT equipment. ASHRAE defines the servers having different classes: A1, A2, A3, A4, and B and C. A lot of data centers are largely populated with A2 and A3 servers. Some A4, but mostly A2 and A3. The A2 servers have a allowable intake temperature of 95 degrees for a period of time, 95 degrees. A3 servers, 104 degrees is allowable. And then also on the relative humidity side, there's a tremendous amount of waste in the industry on keeping relative humidity parameters too tight. A lot of people are still at 45% plus or minus 5%. But A2 servers can handle 20 to 80% relative humidity. A3 servers, 8% to 85%. So a lot of people that are doing things well, that are really getting after efficiency, they are killing the relative humidity control in their data center. You have to some degree, if you're going to use outside free air. But even if you're not, widening those ranges can really help improve efficiency.
Mm-hmm. Lars, you said something really prolific, and I took it to heart. You know, you can't purchase efficiency; you have to manage efficiency. I like that. Sounds like a good blog post.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Good. So let's take a look at the continued conversation here, right? So you guys remember the previous slide, right, where we talked about 1,000 racks, we talked about the $3.2 million mark. And by the way, any other questions, anything else, make sure you're popping that into the Q&A section here. Lars and I get a chance to talk to you just a little bit. But we talked specifically about how just a few dollars can make a real-world difference here. And to that extent, right, you're taking a look at almost $260,000 in total savings, annual savings, when you just have a 2-degree increase in set point, and specifically what you can do in terms of just manipulating that speed limit, as you called it, Lars, so brilliantly, inside of your data center specifically. There's so much you can do, and there's a great Gartner report that data center managers can save up to 4% in energy costs for every single degree of upward change in baseline temperatures. So, you know, there's ways to look at that speed limit, and then there's ways to, you know, put a phone book under your seat and actually see above the steering wheel and go a little bit faster. And, you know, to that extent, Lars, just like you were talking about, there's great ways to save on dollars, but you don't have to sacrifice or, you know, put your environment at risk by going just a little bit above the speed limit and seeing big savings in here. And again, Lars, this is to your point. What are your thoughts here?
Yeah, a really important issue. There's been a lot of noise, a lot of people have gotten all worked up about the concept of raising temperatures and reducing efficiency, reducing reliability of the IT equipment and reducing ride-through. But it's really important to make a distinction. The baseline temperature, they say by upward change in the baseline temperature, what they mean there is the supply temperature of the air, or the return air temperature, depending if you have return or supply control. Doesn't matter. It's still raising the supply temperature of the conditioned air. It is possible to raise the supply temperature without increasing the intake temperature to the IT equipment. So when people talk about raising temperatures in the data centers, they think it affects every temperature in the room. However, if airflow management is rolled into the process, it's possible to raise the baseline, raise the supply temperatures without increasing IT equipment intake temperatures, even reducing them. And that comes because given, so say a data center is, you know, in its current state, the supply temperature has to be 60 degrees to keep all the IT equipment happy. That's given the level of airflow management that exists in the room. If the airflow management is improved, then the maximum intake temperature to the IT equipment drops, and now the supply temperature, the baseline temperature, can be raised, and intake temperatures return to where they were before with a higher baseline or higher supply temperature. So that's a really important dynamic to notice.
Mm-hmm. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And looking at new kinds of use cases out there and what people are doing within their data center, right? Again, it's important to know that if you're working in the data center world today, to know what your facility is actually doing or hosting, right? Things like big data, virtualization, and so on. And to that extent, depending on your use case, a lot of times you might need a new kind of solution out there. So looking at this kind of scenario there, where these new kinds of technologies are revolutionizing cooling and data center containment. And in that sense, and Lars, I'm definitely going to let you speak to this in just a second, but there's a few ways to look at this. Base model, there's no containment. Some kind of a legacy containment model, or something that we're seeing, something called iLock from Upside Technology specifically. And these are really, really cool, again, no pun intended, kind of containment methodologies where you can apply these to new and emerging kinds of use cases, where you begin to see the ROI and especially the cost savings very, very quickly. And again, these are numbers and facts and figures that you can come in and talk about. Remember what we discussed earlier. Containment and air containment is one of the predominant models and ways to create efficiency, or at least find better ways to manage it within your specific data center model. And a lot of times, coupled with virtualization, you can absolutely become the hero of your organization by deploying the top two, savings and power and cooling efficiency methodologies that are currently on the market. And from my experience, I've seen iLock in action. I've seen how it's being deployed, really kind of the powerful architecture to impact modern data centers today. But I mean, I get, shameless plug here, but I think this is a great segue into a conversation around where modular containment impacts data centers today, where iLock technologies are actually differentiating the market in general, and kind of what organizations can expect from this kind of a solution. So Lars, I'm going to pass it to you and see if you can get your thoughts here.
Yeah, I'm going to keep the comments on this one really simple and just say that a lot of sites have held back from implementing containment because of the cost and complexity to implement. The labor required, the additional resources, and the additional construction activity, people on site. But with our modular containment, all that goes away. It's really simple. You pull it. It literally takes longer to take it out of the box than it does to install it. I'm serious about that. So there are ways to get into containment and to start to join what so many people are doing to improve the efficiency of the site that don't have to be as complex as previously thought. And regardless of product, I'm going to say that the greatest bang for the buck comes from installing doors on the ends of the aisles and blanking panels. So these are relatively low-cost ways to really improve airflow management, and then be able to go make the changes at the cooling controls to realize the savings and recover stranded capacity.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. Well, Lars, I don't know if you're ready or not. This is arguably my favorite part of the presentation here. Our top 5 data center best practices for the digital evolution. So I hope everyone's ready to get this great information here. And again, any comments, questions, or thoughts, Lars and I, we are almost done here and wrapped up, so we're going to get a chance to talk to you guys here in just a minute. But here are some thoughts. The first 2 are from yours truly. And 3, 4, and 5 are gonna be from Lars, and he'll talk about those in just a second here. But let me kind of bring up this topic here. So think outside the physical, leverage virtualization. I can't stress enough, right? Again, whether you have virtualization in your environment already, you're maybe asking the question, how much do I have, and maybe even do I need more? And there's a lot of really great ways to do this. And it doesn't matter what vertical you're in, whether it's healthcare, FinServ, pharma, manufacturing, whether you have a co-location data center, virtualization works with compliance, cloud systems, and you can absolutely work with a good partner to help you get to a better virtualization state. But honestly, in my world and what I've seen, convergence, new kinds of environments are really great ways to change data center economics for the better and create greater levels of efficiency. The other one is also really interesting. My number 2, think of cooling as an ever-evolving part of your data center, and cooling as a science. And if you go to the Upside blog, you'll see where I've written a few articles around, really this concept of cooling as a science, and as a non-binary, very fluid kind of architecture that continues to change and evolve with data centers. And as density increases, as we put new infrastructure here into the data center, that's a fact, right? You know cooling is going to change, whether it's, again, you need to increase temperatures or monitor ways that, aisle and airflow cooling is actually working. So in that sense, you have to continuously innovate and you have to continuously analyze your cooling ecosystem, because that is where you can create a lot of cost savings. And again, it could be as simple as looking at airflow containment, doing a computational fluid study, or something along the lines of working, for example, with Upside Technologies to analyze your ecosystem and understand what's happening with your cooling environment. But again, think of it as something that's ever evolving and certainly ever changing. And when you start to approach cooling as a science, you're going to really start to create a really big base around great savings and performance in your data center as well. So those are my top two. I want to pass it off to Lars here for 3, 4, and 5.
So recovering stranded capacity. I hope most people have heard that term, stranded capacity. A number of years ago, when virtualization took off, it was because people realized how poorly utilized the IT infrastructure was. It's an extraordinarily expensive capital expense to have that infrastructure, and it was in single digits utilization, which is just abysmal for that kind of, for any asset, but especially for something that has such a huge impact on the balance sheet. Looking at the utilization of cooling infrastructure is the way to identify the capacity or the quantity of stranded capacity that can be recovered. Looking at the installed cooling capacity, if you have 10, 30-ton units, you've got 300 tons, you've got approximately a megawatt of cooling capacity installed in the site. And if you got a UPS load of 3, 4, 500 kilowatts, then the utilization of that cooling infrastructure is around half or less than half. And that's a really important piece to take a look at. Working together, number 4, IT and facilities must have a shared understanding of the science behind all these best practices, the goals, the protocols. This comes down to something as simple as making sure that IT equipment gets installed in a way that breathes front to back, so it complies with the hot and cold aisle concept. The gap between IT and facilities has existed as long as I've been in this industry. It's a ongoing topic. Some organizations are figuring it out and doing it really well, and many still aren't. That if it doesn't exist, shared conversations between IT and facilities is one of the most important things that organizations can do. And then the metrics. Stay on top of your game. Measure the, calculate the metrics for airflow management in the computer room. The non-sexy stuff like bypass open area of the raised floor, utilization of the cooling infrastructure, open spaces in cabinets, and these things, staying on top of them will keep a site in a position to be able to handle whatever comes next as best as the site possibly can. All
Great.
right.
Great,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So let's continue on.
Lars,
We're just about done. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I definitely want to hear a little bit more. So I know you're going to wrap us up here before we get into the Q&A section. I think there might be a couple of questions here. So Lars, go ahead and take us through the rest of the conversation here.
Yeah, so on the next slide, here's the 4 product, family lines of our solutions for addressing airflow management in the computer room. We have the cold lock line. That's many different solutions for sealing the horizontal plane of the raised floor. Obviously don't apply to a slab environment. Hot lock line is for all of the various openings in cabinets. We have pass-through blanking panels, really useful for KVM units, and we now have our new product line, which is our switch fix, which ducts the conditioned air back to the rear-mounted switches in cabinets. We're seeing some huge benefits of addressing that, enabling the servers, the switches in the back of the cabinets to get conditioned air from the front of the cabinet. and then filling the remaining spaces with blanking panels. The iLock line is the containment line of products. There's an adjustable rack gap panel which seals the space between cabinets where there's a missing cabinet or a column. We've got the baffles and modular containment doors. What's unique about all of these products is they all attach magnetically. So there's no construction, no screwing, no bolting, no labor coming into the data center. Everything, you pull it out of the box and it attaches magnetically. Then Energy Lock is our monitoring solutions. We've got both wired and wireless solutions and industry-leading leak detection sensing cables. So those are our family line of products, just to give you a sense of how we're addressing all of the needs in the computer room.
Awesome.
And next, we'll want to make sure that everyone's aware of our final webinar for the month, which is obviously next Wednesday, the virtual facility, and we'll really dig into how you can utilize computational fluid dynamics modeling or engineering simulation to manage your site moving forward, both to clean up what's happening and, more importantly, to make sure that as new equipment comes in, that you get it in the right locations so you don't bind yourself to problems in the future. And now with that, we'll share with you our contact information. Both Bill and I are very happy to have any follow-up conversations that you might have. You know, we've covered a lot of different things, and we could have dove a lot deeper on a number of these topics. And of course, your unique considerations. Maybe you don't want to reveal what's going on at your site in a public forum. So we're happy to have those conversations offline. And now we'll address some questions.
All right, this first question is for Lars specifically. What are the biggest factors and use cases impacting a change in cooling requirements?
The biggest things impacting cooling requirements, I'd say, are the high density equipment that is coming out, and we're seeing sites deploying a few cabinets here and there that just have really extraordinary densities, and they're causing problems. If they don't have all the equipment in a really good hot-cold aisle configuration, then those high velocities and high temperature airs are really causing problems for adjacent rows. There's another issue, which is the higher delta T, the higher temperature, exhaust temperature of the equipment. It's really important to have some containment in place to keep that from causing problems.
Yeah, and I got to piggyback off of that. I think that absolutely makes sense. You know, one of the factors that I'm certainly seeing is, number one, different kind of equipment that's going into the infrastructure, the data centers in general, and even more so, it's not ever a flat data center model. Parts and pieces of your data center might be doing different things, whether it's, you know, again, big data, more virtualization in one spot, or even if an area has different kinds of gear in general, your airflow is going to be different throughout your data center, unless you're running something completely uniform. And again, to that extent, things like containment are a great way for you to control specific parts of your data center environment while allowing the rest of it to breathe easier. So as these new kinds of solutions and use cases fit in, know that maybe traditional cooling methodologies aren't going to entirely work, and that there's really great ways to impact your cooling from a high level perspective as well, and working with all these new kinds of digital trends.
Thanks, Bill. Yeah, so another point to bring up is that as virtualization happens, as people move workloads to the cloud, outsource their IT loads, it's really important to do an evaluation of the site to make sure that the cooling infrastructure controls have been optimized to the new workload, for the reduced load. And that's something I see people missing very often, is they have a shift in the way that they're getting their compute done, and they're not taking a look at the infrastructure to fully realize the benefits. You know, because if you've moved it off-site, you might as well not be, you might as well get all the benefits of getting rid of it. So that's an important aspect of the evolution in the data center.
All right, everybody. Well, we thank you for your time. We went a couple minutes over here, but if you have further questions, again, don't hesitate to reach out to Bill and Lars. They're more than willing to respond offline to you guys. And we'll see you next week for our final week of Airflow Management Awareness Month. And we appreciate your time. You have a great day.